All right, let's dive into a chapter of American history that's often hiding in plain sight. A private society that counted some of the nation's most famous founders as its members. We're going to uncover how their shared ideals literally became a blueprint for the United States.
So let me ask you something. You've got George Washington, the general and first president. You have Ben Franklin, the genius diplomat and inventor. And you've got Paul Revere, the guy who made that legendary midnight ride. We all know them as patriots, right? But what was the other thread connecting them? Turns out their bond went way deeper than just fighting for independence. Yeah, behind the scenes, away from the battlefields and the Continental Congress, they were part of a brotherhood, one that was bound together by a very specific set of values. That's it. That's the connection. They, along with a ton of other key players from that era, were all Freemasons. And once you understand this, it gives you this fascinating new way to look at the birth of the United States. Okay, so what exactly was this group? Before we jump into all the conspiracy stuff and secret symbols, we really need to get a handle on what Freemasonry was like back in the 18th century. And honestly, it might not be what you think it is. At its core, Freemasonry was a fraternity. Think of it like a popular social and philosophical movement. It wasn't a religion, and it wasn't a political party. It was a place for men to get together and talk about the big ideas that were changing the world. Ideas like liberty, equality, and tolerance. And I mean, just look at this roster. We're not talking about small-time players here. You've got George Washington, the father of the country, Benjamin Franklin, who was actually a Grand Master in his lodge, John Hancock of the famous signature, Paul Revere, James Monroe, even Alexander Hamilton. The number of founders involved just goes to show you how influential this fraternity really was. So this brings up a huge question, right? How did these private ideals, the ones being discussed in these lodges, make the jump into the public documents of a brand new nation? Well, let's follow the trail. We can break down their core values and see how they map almost directly onto the American experiment. First up, liberty. This was, without a doubt, the cornerstone of Masonic thinking. In a world that was run by kings and queens, they were pushing this radical idea of self-governance and individual rights. This even included freedom of conscience, which is basically the right to think and believe for yourself without anyone forcing you. Now, does that Masonic value of liberty ring a bell? It absolutely should. I mean, listen to those words from the Declaration of Independence. It's like they're singing the same song. It's not a word-for-word copy, of course, but the philosophical DNA is undeniably there. Okay, next up is equality, and you have to understand this was a huge deal back then. In the 18th century, your social class was everything. It defined your entire life. But inside that Masonic lodge, a rich merchant and, say, a local blacksmith could meet as equals, as brothers. This was completely radical for the time. And that principle didn't just stay inside the lodge. By practicing equality, the Masons were basically running a dress rehearsal for a new type of society, one without kings or a formal aristocracy. It helped build the foundation for a republic, where power comes from we, the people, not from your bloodline. The third big value is tolerance, especially religious tolerance. So the Masons had this really interesting rule. To join, you just had to believe in a supreme being. They didn't care what you called that being or what specific church you went to. This meant that Catholics, Protestants, Jews, they could all sit in the same room as brothers, which was almost unheard of in an age of so much religious conflict. And the influence here is just crystal clear. You can draw a perfectly straight line from this Masonic idea of religious tolerance right to the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the part that gives us freedom of religion and separation of church and state. It's a core American ideal that has deep roots in this fraternity. And finally, there's the rule of law. See, every Masonic lodge ran itself based on its own written constitution and a set of rules. Members elected their officers, they voted on issues. It was all very orderly and democratic. They were basically little self-governing republics. So you can imagine how powerful this was for guys like Washington and Franklin. They spent years inside this system learning and practicing self-governance. It just reinforced their belief that a country should be built on a stable, written constitution, a government of laws, not just based on the whims of a king. Okay, so we've seen all the historical links, but what's the big takeaway here? Why should any of this, about a private club from the 1700s, still matter to us today? I mean, let's be honest. For a lot of people, the Freemasons probably just sound like some dusty old secret club, a historical footnote maybe. So why should we actually care about their influence on the founders? Well, we should care because this whole story adds this incredible depth to America's founding ideals. It shows us that ideas like liberty and equality weren't just theories they read in a book. No, these were principles they were actively practicing and debating in their social lives. It helps us understand where ideas like the separation of church and state really came from. And it's a great reminder that the founders were part of a culture that deeply valued getting involved and serving the community.
Now, you really can't talk about the Freemasons without addressing the elephant in the room: all the conspiracy theories. This stuff has fueled countless books and movies, but it's so important that we separate the real history from the myth.
Because you had so many powerful men who were members of this quote-unquote secret society, it's just been a really easy target for theories about some hidden cabal pulling the strings of history. The secret symbols, the rituals, it all adds to the mystery.
But the real story, the one that's actually supported by historical evidence, is, I think, way more interesting. The influence of the Masons wasn't about some secret plot to take over the world. It was about the power of shared ideas.
So, here's the bottom line. The story of the Freemasons and the Founding Fathers isn't about a conspiracy. It's really a story about how a network of people, all united by a philosophy of liberty, equality, and tolerance, could help lay the intellectual groundwork for a completely new kind of country.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. The founders were part of a movement that promoted a specific set of ideals, and they used those ideals to build their world. It really makes you stop and wonder, what are the shared ideals, the ones being talked about in our own circles that are shaping the world we're building right now? Thanks for watching.